views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program that talks to reporters and writers and journalists and editors and filmmakers and photographers. And this evening we've got a great show because we're going to talk to a really good reporter who has some really interesting things to report, and also to a photographer who is kind of a legend in Bronx journalism, but is also a photographer, and he has some great photos that will expand your horizon just a little bit. But let's start out right now and say good evening to Rebecca Lewis from City and State New York, one of their fine staff reporters there. Nice to have you back with us, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be invited.
And I'm going to just start with this, and I told you a little bit before and let people see it. This is a cover story that you did about Lindsay Boylan, and I was particularly fond of it. For people who don't know, and you're going to talk more about it, Ms. Boylan was the first accuser of Governor Cuomo in the sexual harassment suits and contentions. And I was not aware of this. I'm sorry, because I cover the Bronx. She's running for Manhattan Borough President. What an interesting figure this is in the city and the state. So here's somebody with major complaints that could, depending what happens, bring down the governor of the state of New York, and she's running for Manhattan Borough President. And I didn't know. So that's the beauty of great reporting for getting me into it. So let's just talk about Ms. Boylan and your work with her, your interview with her, and how do you balance these two things of, she challenges the governor and she's a legitimate candidate for Manhattan Borough President.
It was, she's a candidate for Manhattan Borough President. She had actually previously been a candidate for Congress. She ran against Representative Jerry Nadler back in 2020. That does make her a little bit more, I don't want to say more, but sort of an interesting figure. It kind of sets her apart a little bit from some of the other women who've come forward and said that they've experienced sexual harassment or sexual misconduct at the hands of the governor. And I just talked to her a little bit about that, given the fact that she was already something of a public figure, and how that impacted her decision to come forward. If it made it any easier. It's never easy for any woman to speak publicly about, experiences like this. But she was telling me that to some degree, yes, that she was a public figure. She had a following. She felt like, she was able to, and that people would listen to her. But she also acknowledged at the same time that she's a public figure, and that, kind of opened herself up to retaliation, as, reporting kind of played that out. Almost as soon as she first tweeted, there were leaks of supposed personnel documents about her that went out to several major outlets. Later on, there was reporting about calls being made to former staffers after she first, tweeted her and
Unbelievable.
a letter that was reportedly being drafted that never actually saw the light of day about, her and her allegations. And, I haven't seen any reporting, haven't heard about anything kind of similar for any of the other women who've come forward who aren't really public figures, who haven't been in the political limelight.
So here's my question, and maybe it's a terrible question to ask. We've had male figures running for office, Scott Stringer, who had been accused, and he's running for office. This is the first time in my memory that somebody who openly accused a current elected official, not to mention the powerful governor of the state of New York, and she's running for office. Do you think it affects the voters at all? Or is that, because I'm unfamiliar with the race because I cover the Bronx and I don't really watch that. What are your thoughts about that? Is this a factor in the race, or is she able to separate that and her political agenda?
I think it is. I think it is a factor just in that she she made a pretty big splash in the news, and her name is probably out there. Her name is probably known. Interviews with her often touch on these allegations that she's made, and she is, kind of a known figure for standing up to a governor that many Democrats in New York will probably, maybe have split opinions, but certainly it's not an unpopular, unknown opinion that some people consider him a bully. So I think that, it's not something that I think directly impacts her race. She certainly has plenty of local issues that she's running on, um, in a very a pretty stellar field of candidates. Honestly, it's I've done some reporting on the race, and it's a lot of good candidates in that race. Hard to say who exactly is going to come out on top in the end. A lot of strong candidates. Um, but it's when you have someone who's made kind of a big news splash, whose name is out there for any reason, especially a
Yeah, it's like
reason like
all
taking on the
publicity is,
governor.
yeah, all publicity is good publicity in that way. Not to say that this is a good thing. Anyway, I just I wanted to acknowledge it. I wanted to represent it. People check out City and State New York. Look for Rebecca Lewis's profile on Lindsey Boylan. It's a fascinating read, and it really tells a story that I've been covering New York City politics, Bronx politics, mostly, of course, for 26 years. I've never really heard of this dynamic, this dual thing going on. And so, thank you, Rebecca, for bringing it to us. The other thing, as you know, that I want to talk about, and this really is mind opening, and that is we hear about all the goals and of New York State. That they want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by 2050. They want to be 100% carbon free in electricity by 2040, and 70% of electricity has to come from renewable sources by 2030. Your reporting, based on a research or a study that was done, says, you know what? Talk is cheap. And we may not get there. So why don't you evaluate the goals and what the reality is of us actually achieving what the legislature has laid out?
Mhm. Well, New York has a history of setting ambitious climate goals. And I've reported in the past, after the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act passed in 2019, that the state hasn't always been super good at hitting those goals in a timely fashion. And the goals that were set in 2019 are certainly they are, and were, and I believe still are, nation leading. It was national news when this bill passed. It was the state was lauded. These were really ambitious goals that would require a lot of work to hit, but are certainly doable. And then a New York Public Interest Research Group, NIPERG, put out a report near the end of session because this information hasn't been easily compiled anywhere else. If you're willing to look through a whole bunch of reports, state reports and energy reports and press releases from the governor, you could find this information, but it could be a little bit hard to dig through this stuff. They put out a report and said basically, this is where we're at. We're not doing, in some areas we're doing okay. In other areas we have a lot of work to do.
Is this a matter of money? Is it a matter of the legislature looking at the budget and saying, okay, let's get serious? Or is it
It's
infrastructure? I mean, or is it education of the public about recycling and
it's a
other
little bit
things?
of everything. It's not just the legislature's job, the agencies, the governor, everyone has a role to play, but I think I was focused a little bit more on the legislature because the session had just ended and there were climate activists and environmental organizations and groups and advocates who weren't especially pleased with how the legislature handled climate issues this year. It was kind of a mixed bag on broader environmental issues. They did pass some things that like the League of Conservation Voters praised, and Environmental Advocates New York praised some of their environmental bills that they passed having to do with toxic chemicals and things of the
Right.
like. But in terms of climate, in order to meet the goals of the 2019 bill, the CLCPA, it will require some bold legislation. And for the past 2 years, that hasn't happened. A lot of
Hmm.
people were hoping that one particular bill, it is the Climate and Community Investment Act. Yes, I got those in the right order. It's
All
two
right,
C's.
that's
The
fine.
Climate and Community Investment Act, which would have basically instituted like a carbon tax on big polluters and use those funds to help reach the climate goals, because there
We
will be a
need
monetary
we need
need.
so much infrastructure to do this. I mean, and we're talking about electricity infrastructure, which of course means dealing with Con Ed and reforming how they do their work and how they deliver electricity. And it's just so massive. Me, it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to need a lot of infrastructure because Con Ed is going to have to redo how they handle their all of the delivery of electricity, how they generate electricity. I mean, this requires those things. To me, the bottom line, bold leadership. You have got to, and we're talking about in the Assembly with Carl Hastie, in the Senate with Andrea Stewart Cousins, and of course the governor. We'll see what happens in the future. What his status is. He was, as we know, a weakened governor during this during the last budget negotiation. But to do this, you're going to need somebody or people to stand up and say, we want to make this happen, right?
Certainly, yes, and that's why some climate activists and advocates and organizations have been disappointed that there was such big action, such bold action in 2019 to set these goals, and that it's the past 2 years has been relatively little action from the legislature to actually meet them. This is everything. This is infrastructure. This is offshore wind. This is replacing cars with electric cars, and redesigning our grid. It's everything. If we want to meet the various so many different goals, ambitious, bold
Right.
goals, every sector needs to be part of this.
And one thing which we now don't have time because we gotta end and talk to our friend Bob Capstatter, who's going to be delivering some photographs. Um, the question of how to replace the electricity delivery that you're losing from Indian Point is a whole other thing, because it appears that we're going to be behind the eight ball when it comes to that. The next time when you write about that, I'm going to have you back and we'll talk about that. How about that? Does that
That's a
work?
big one.
Yeah, that is a big one, because they say it's going to put us back from a delivery standpoint. Good luck. Rebecca Lewis, I told you I love both of the stories we talked about, but this cover story about Lindsay Boylan was fantastic. Thanks for keeping us in touch, and thanks for doing great work at City and State New York.
And thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to take a break. As I said, Bob Capstatter, everybody in the Bronx knows him, former Daily News editor, and now a photographer. And he has some great photos of another place. You'll find out. Don't go away.